While the Constitution boasts the claim, all men are created equal, the mass disenfranchisement of African Americans in the United States is still very much a reality, disproving it. While some states have since removed the disenfranchisement of felons, most states, including California, removed the right to vote from felons while incarcerated. On top of all the other damage to individuals and communities, the disenfranchisement of felons serves a role in perpetuating incarceration of especially African Americans by severing civil liberty and stake in the community integral to rehabilitation and reformation of felons. One of these damaged communities is that of Alameda County in California. The school-to-prison pipeline and disproportionate incarceration rate of African Americans relative to their population demonstrate systematic biases and issues regarding race in the United States and California. Alameda County in particular has the highest crime rate of all other counties in California in conjunction with a notoriously corrupt Oakland police force. The large incarceration rate, largely due to the corrupt police force, gives enfranchisement an incredible impact on the community of reforming felons in the California county of Alameda. Crime in the United States and California disproportionately affects minorities, especially African Americans. The above infographic, adapted from statistics from Massey's Categorically Unequal, demonstrates the proportion of African American imprisonment when compared to other factors such as unemployment, infant mortality, and out-of-wedlock births. The enormous difference between the imprisonment of African Americans in the United States demonstrates the unfairness of the justice system, where African Americans face incarceration 8 times more often than their white counterparts. The proportion of African Americans to whites in the U.S. as a percentage of the population compared to the percentage of the prison population demonstrates a stark difference. There are many arguments explaining as to why this is so, including opinions from sociologists and those from racial biases. While the opposing stakeholders, generally conservative Republicans, believe the African American communities are simply inherently prone to crime, the common explanation is tied to the corrupt police system. The Oakland police force, for example, are famous for their corruption when they target African American citizens, over-police African American communities, and disproportionately harm and kill African American suspects, and yet receive little to no punitive action in response. Whatever the explanation is, the clear fact of the matter is the African American population is disproportionately incarcerated compared to their white counterparts, which demonstrates a disproportionate effect of incarceration on the African American population. Applying the statistics to the demographics of Alameda County, African Americans, despite only making up roughly 6% of the Alameda population, make up 15% of the arrests and subsequent imprisonment populations. Comparatively, whites making up 54% of the Alameda population make up only 37% of the arrest and prison population. This means African Americans are nearly 4 times as likely to end up incarcerated than their white counterparts. This, in turn, means African Americans are disproportionately going to be a part of the recovering felon population, explaining why they are especially interested in the issue of enfranchisement of felons. The American school system perpetuates and mirrors this disproportionality through the school-to-prison pipeline. The data demonstrates a large disproportion between black student population and black student expulsion. The percentage of either group expelled is similar in number, with blacks ranging about 34% and whites about 36%. However, the total population of black students is 16%, while whites are 51%. This is a huge disparity demonstrating, at some level, a large negative bias against black students, which not only affects the students psychologically, but also leads to less and lower quality education. Such a disadvantage is known to create a higher likelihood of resorting to crime and therefore unproportionately creates a clearer path for black students to jail. When compared to the aforementioned data comparing the disparity between African American population and African American prison population, the numbers are shockingly similar. California is not immune to this discrimination either, as African Americans make up only 6% of the California population, but 28% of its prison population. Just as the data demonstrates a racial bias against African American children by teachers and principals, this relationship shows a clear correlation between explicit or implicit racial bias in the school system and incarceration rates in the California prison system by racially biased members of the California justice system. Additionally, the disproportionate numbers also indicate African Americans will also make up a disproportionately large amount of the felon population, giving them a rather large stake in the enfranchisement issue. Additionally, the prison industrial system values punishment over rehabilitation, which negatively impacts minority communities. The California prison system, by improperly validating the tools it uses to assess inmates' rehabilitative needs to ensure they are still accurate, are making the rehabilitative process in the prison system essentially worthless for the inmates. Rather than receiving proper rehabilitative treatment, the California DOCR believes the outdated tools are no longer accurate for the inmates they are assigned to, which means the inmates are receiving improper rehabilitative care. This makes the likelihood of recidivism stay relatively the same, keeping criminals within the system longer than if they received the proper care. Due to the unproportionate amount of African Americans within the prison system, the communities they come from are therefore negatively impacted by having more within the system than contributing to the betterment of society. The prison system, rather than properly analyzing the rehabilitative needs of its inmates, prioritizes their detainment over their reintegration into society. The vast majority of inmates in the California prison system were not put into programs required for proper rehabilitation, thus creating an environment where the inmates learn no valuable skills or coping mechanism which would aid in their reintegration. Meanwhile, all prisoners face the same degradation and punishment often received in prisons, as proven countless times by famous studies like the Stanford Prison Experiment. This disregard for rehabilitation hurts the prison population, keeping them in prison longer and keeping their odds of recidivism the same as if they had not had any programs at all. This means the prison population, which, if properly trained and released, would help their home communities, are instead kept in prison longer and not given anything to aid their release process. As previously mentioned, the prison population is disproportionately African American, meaning the prison population which could aid their home communities if properly trained are disproportionately hurt by the ineptitude of the prison system. But how exactly can we solve this? Enfranchisement aids rehabilitation. The graph demonstrates the percentage of those arrested from 1997 to 2000, comparing those who voted and not among those who were previously arrested. This data would demonstrate the likelihood of recidivism among voters and non-voters. The data seems to indicate that those who voted were more than half as likely to get arrested again compared to those who did not. This comparison suggests enfranchisement, which infinitely increases the likelihood of voting compared to those who are disenfranchised, would positively affect criminals on the path to rehabilitation. The above source demonstrates the massive decrease in sustained low population of inmates in California after the integration of realignment into the prison system. The system of realignment encouraged civic participation and saw the recidivism rate sharply drop afterwards, as shown by the graph, when the prison system drops from 160,000 to nearly 130,000 in the first year of realignment's implementation alone. The civic participation allows the reforming inmates to relate and connect with their respective communities, giving them a reason to stay clean and turn away from crime. While civic participation takes many forms, the most commonly known form is that of voting, especially among the conservative Republican stakeholders. However, the current realignment process does not include this popular feature, as current California law still denies incarcerated felons the right to vote. Rather than kickstart the reformation process, the prison system decides to wait until they are released before they allow the most popular form of civic participation to be held within the rehabilitating hands of the reforming felon population. To conclude, the American prison system maintains a history of racial bias, dating back to its inception just before and after the Civil War, as the first official police were slave catchers and the first official prisons were meant to take advantage of the famous clause within the 13th Amendment. While one action cannot completely undo centuries of oppression, the simple act of allowing a fundamental right to those most negatively impacted within the community is a start. The enfranchisement of felons has proven time and time again to aid the rehabilitative process of the prison population. The negative racial biases within the justice system disproportionately disenfranchises the African American community, similar to the time of Jim Crow. To combat this, just as the country did in 1969, the Alameda County, State of California, and the United States as a whole must re-enfranchise the prison population. The road to suffrage has been long and filled with roadblocks. However, regaining the right to vote brings the African American felon community and their neighborhoods another step closer to fulfilling their deserved liberty and justice for all.